Welcome to the I Am One podcast, where we chat with Postpartum Support International volunteers to discuss why and how exactly they're supporting the mental health of new families. I'm your host, Danny Giddens. I'm a perinatal mental health certified advocate, a support group leader in my community, and a staff member here at PSI. Hearing one person's story on a podcast changed the trajectory of my life. It was the catalyst to me opening up about my undiagnosed postpartum anxiety, depression, and OCD, processing my own trauma, and realizing that advocacy is my life's work. I'm joined by my co-host, Emily Jankowski-Newton.
It's me. I'm the co-host,
Director of PSI's Climb Out of the Darkness program. We've discovered that there is strength in processing trauma and empowerment in sharing stories.
So that's what we're here to do. Our guests will take us on their journey from pregnancy or adoption through their low on to getting help and finding themselves again. And finally, how they're making a difference today. As I always say, it's the coolest club you didn't want to join, because being a part of PSI means we went through something. And as a result, I've become connected to the coolest, kindest, most fun people that I would have otherwise never had the chance to meet.
One of the most important things that we've learned is that we're not alone. There's something powerful in knowing I am one of many. Whether you're already connected to the perinatal mental health world, looking for ways to support parents and families, or just want to hang out with us in your earbuds, we're so glad you tuned in.
And who knows, maybe we'll hear from you next.
On today's episode, we're sitting down with Samantha Reaves, survivor of a trifecta of PMADs, staff on the communication and development teams here at PSI, and she's also a local support volunteer in her state of North Carolina. Transitioning to parenthood during a global pandemic did not go how she imagined. So when Samantha reached out for help from her healthcare provider and was given very few resources, she knew something needed to change. We'll hear about how Sam found PSI and how PSI helped facilitate her recovery through online support groups, as well as finding specialized local support in her area, and how she is supporting folks in the perinatal period now. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the I Am One podcast are the speaker's own. Tuning into this podcast is not a replacement for therapy or any other form of professional help. Our discussions cover personal stories of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and may feel triggering to some listeners. Your number one priority is to take care of yourself. So if you are in need of help, please reach out to the PSI helpline by calling or texting HELP to 1-800-944-4773 for help in English and in Spanish. At PSI, we want you to know you are not alone, you are not to blame, and with help, you will be well. Okay, let's get on with the podcast. Samantha, welcome to the pod, my friend. We are so excited to be sitting here with you on the weekend edition of the I Am One podcast. We normally record during the week, but this is a Sunday.
For the record, this will still be released on a Tuesday. It's not like it's going to get released on a different day of the week.
We're not changing things up, but it is a Sunday that we're recording on, so it feels a little bit different. It feels nice. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited. Another first-time podcaster. So
yes, I've only been a listener thus far.
Okay.
First time being on the pod. So
well, this is a friendly place.
Welcome aboard.
If you would be so kind, could you give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are?
Sure. I'm Samantha Reaves. I am on staff with PSI. I joined staff February of 2022 as a communications specialist now. And yes, I recently moved to North Carolina with my family. I'm in Winston-Salem with my husband, Nathan, and my little pandemic baby, George. He's 2.5, and the pets. We relocated from Tallahassee, Florida. It has been lovely so far. We're loving the seasons.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been with PSI just over a year. I also volunteer as a support coordinator for North Carolina as well.
Nice.
Cool.
Okay, I have a question about that. When you moved, were you already a support coordinator in Florida? And then you were like, okay, I'm a support coordinator in North Carolina now. What does that look like when that happens?
So I became a support coordinator once I moved here.
Oh, okay.
So unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that. But I'd say, mostly recovered from my postpartum experience when I started working with PSI. But with the move and just a lot going on personally, I was working there, but didn't fully get on board with volunteering as well until I'd been working there for a while. So I started as a support coordinator in October of just this past year.
Okay.
And really, because my position with PSI is I feel like there's definitely an impact, and that's very rewarding, but it's very indirect. I'm writing a lot of emails, putting together newsletters, fundraising solicitations, working on like strategic communications campaigns, but not so much one-to-one with any moms, practitioners, family members. And I really felt like with my experience, I just really wanted that level of connection with the people. So it's been a bit challenging to start that in a place that you haven't lived in long, because the whole idea of being a support coordinator is you have a network here of, practitioners, support groups, therapists that you can send people out to, and refer them to, where I'm kind of still building that as we go. But I still feel like I've been pretty successful with it so far with the requests that I've gotten. But I think it'll only get bigger and better the longer I live here, and the more I kind of establish that kind of the local resources,
Awesome. Well, that's really cool. I'm excited to hear all about all kinds of things here. But could you get us started by telling us how in your personal life have perinatal mood and anxiety disorders touched your life?
Yes, now it seems that's such a big question because my postpartum experience has completely transformed the person that I am. And even though it was the hardest thing I have been through in my life, hands down, like don't even have to think about it, I'm very grateful because I am stronger, I'm more confident. And even though we would like to have another baby, I know I'm never going to go back to what it was because I have so much more information.
Totally.
And that's really empowering. So even though it was awful, I'm really grateful to be on the other side of that and to be working here and volunteering here and helping women and birthing people and their families have it be less terrible. That's a really rewarding place to be.
Yeah.
So when I was pregnant with George, I was like 6 months pregnant in March of 2020 when, the world casually shut down, which was a terrifying time to be pregnant. So I think we went to one friend's wedding while I was, pregnant and showing. And after that, later stage of pregnancy was all like stay at home order, have your groceries delivered.
Oh yeah.
I only ever went out to go to the doctor until my baby was born. So that was scary and pretty isolating because you didn't have your support people around. Do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks? That was the early days of what do we do? So that was pretty scary. You do the best you can with the situation, right? But it was definitely no visitors at the doctor. We had to cancel our baby moon. My baby shower was me alone in the baby nursery. And my sister and mom were lovely and put baby shower together on Zoom. It was the early days when we Zoomed everything as very well intentioned. But in hindsight, I was like, this is depressing.
Yeah.
I am alone eating a cupcake and by myself.
Bought this cupcake for myself. I am eating.
Yeah. So, it was lovely. Family and friends all signing on and stuff. It was just a sign of the times, I feel. I'm sure there's other pandemic moms that can relate to that are like, yep, didn't exactly go as planned.
No. Did your husband go to doctor's appointments with you, or is that a solo affair?
All of the later ones, when your appointments become more frequent, he was sitting in the car in the parking garage. So he was on site, but no ultrasounds or anything. I think that was right after our anatomy scan. He could go to that one, which was great because we found out the sex of our baby and everything. But after that, it was, you by yourself. So all of that was pretty tough. I actually didn't have an onset of any postpartum symptoms right after my son's birth. I actually started to kind of go downhill mentally, emotionally when I weaned off of breastfeeding. So I sort of thought I missed the boat in a good way, right? Of okay, well, I had my baby. I'm feeling okay, even with these scary circumstances. We're good. And that turned out to be not at all.
This is a judgment-free question, but I want to get a timeline of this. So, when did you stop breastfeeding? For the, for those of us who are was your baby 6 months old? Was your baby 2 years old? And thus maybe, fingers crossed, sleeping through the night? I don't know. Right?
So my goal was to make it to 6 months of breastfeeding. And we did combo feeding the whole time because breastfeeding he never latched. It didn't come easy. The pandemic really influenced my decision to keep trying, even though it wasn't working the way I wanted it to. Because I was like, I felt a lot of pressure to give him what antibodies I had and things like that. But so I made it to 6 months and then weaned for like about a month. And it was like a very fast downfall. So yeah, about between 6 and 7 months is the age of George when we weaned off of breast milk. And I think this was a big part of my struggle with postpartum was I tried to do everything right. Like most parents, right? You try and do the best you can. And I still felt like I did not happen upon the help and the information that I needed. So you call your doctor's office, talk to lactation. I want to start weaning. What do I do? What do I look out for? What is the way?
Yeah.
I do all the things. And I will tell you that conversation was purely the physical of weaning. There was not even a mention of, by the way, if you start to feel an onset of a lot of anxiety or depression or intrusive thoughts, or like that's all, that can happen due to this hormonal shift. There was no like conversation about that. So I have my notepad and I'm like, this is how we do this. This is how I decrease my pumping each day and by week. And I'm like, great, thank you so much. Like, we got this. We don't got this, guys.
Right.
We don't have it. But since I had no idea, I was just not educated that this could happen. Like, I'm like, postpartum, my baby's going to be like 8 months old soon. What are we talking about? That was a huge part of my struggle was I had no idea what was happening. And it was a lot more terrifying than I feel like it needed to be. My diagnoses ended up being a fun trifecta of postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, and postpartum OCD, which I had only heard of postpartum depression. So yeah.
How did the diagnoses come about? Like,
good question.
Were you talking to your husband, or you like called the doctor, or tell me more?
Yeah. My experience with seeking help was very difficult. I was already seeing a therapist. I'd been in therapy for like 3 years or something before I got pregnant, and I stayed with it through pregnancy. So I was already seeing someone who was a good therapist, I would say, very well intentioned, but definitely not specialized in the perinatal period. So, for example, he said things to me when I was like really, really at a peak of like, I don't know what's going on, crying, describing how I was feeling, so lightheaded, daily panic attacks. Like, I feel like something's really wrong. And he said something to the effect of like, well, this pregnancy has really thrown you for a loop.
Yeah, it's completely upended my life.
I was like, yes.
Yeah, there's a pandemic.
But like,
and
yes. But like, what? Okay. Correct. And what do we do? Who do I talk to? What do we do? And it was just sort of like, well, we can try, and like a lot of techniques, but it was like such an acute time for me that I'm like, we're not hearing that I'm like, I feel like I'm on the brink of having to check myself in somewhere, which is a really horrifying place to be, especially in a pandemic with my baby at home, where if you were to do that, it's like, well, if you do that, you're going to be in like COVID isolation from your child.
Yeah.
So then even that, where you'd go to for help, feels even more terrifying than maybe it normally would. So it was like, there wasn't a good connection at first with my therapist to specialized resources, support groups, and care.
Yes.
I did go to my primary doctor, which we could honestly spend a full episode probably discussing, but we won't.
So it went that well.
A good summary, I think, will tell you. I will say one thing that I remember verbatim that will summarize that, and we'll move on, which is I was told, and I quote, "What's happening is you're just hysterical." So that was very dismissive.
Yes.
And me, like under normal circumstances, right, would not put up with that. My normal assertive self would be like, "Excuse me.
What did you just say to me?
Let's take a pause." What did you say to me? But at the time where you are like, it's like you wake up mid panic attack. Like, I didn't know what was going on. That added to so much of my fear. I wasn't in a place, I was just crying. I wasn't in a place to be like, what did you say to me? I was just like, okay. And that was a dead end.
Can I jump in for a hot second?
Yes.
Because
please.
I think you're hitting on a really, really important thing that we talk about. I don't feel like myself. I didn't feel like myself. And I think a lot of times we assume that that just means I was depressed or anxious, which for you was also true. But it also showed up in you weren't yourself in a situation where you would normally have handled something very differently. That's what we mean when we say I don't feel like myself. Like it bleeds over into all these other barriers of our lives. Yeah.
Right. It's bigger than just the symptoms, right? It's like, yeah, you're different. It affects, honestly, like your personality, right? Like for a time at least, of like you are not behaving in a way that you normally would. And it's a very scary place to be when you know that and you're trying to convey that to, you know, family, friends, your doctors, your therapist. And this isn't even to paint any of those parties as the villain, right?
Totally.
But like, that doesn't change the fact that even if there's good intent from all of those supporters, that if no one can offer you the help and information that you need, it's terrifying. It's isolating. It's the scariest thing to just be like, well, I'm trying to do all the things to like not lose it. And it feels like at every turn is like, I'm not really sure. Or you're just hysterical. Or yeah, I don't know. Is like, okay, well, who knows? Because I don't know. And I'm responsible for this infant. And that's also very scary. So that was all very difficult. Before getting a diagnosis was the worst part because I was dealing with a lot of intrusive thoughts. And I have health anxiety anyway. So any other like hypochondriacs out there, we are one and the same. So that was the biggest way my like postpartum anxiety manifested was out of control at a global pandemic. It was dark times. So that was so hard to just manage on my own. And it wasn't so much, which was interesting. I've heard a lot about like people's stories with postpartum anxiety and OCD, that it's all such worry about the baby. But mine was all health anxiety focused on myself and my ability to care for him. So that was exhausting.
People couldn't come in. You weren't allowed to have other people in your house. If you were not there, then who is going to take care of your baby?
And so I was like, something's really wrong and feeling like no one will help me with that. And I'm like, no, something's really not correct. And I would completely spiral about that because I kind of had that issue beforehand and it was not good. So it's a long story to get to the diagnosis, but that's kind of true of, you know, that's really how it was. So I promise I'm answering your question, Emily. But I had to return to I also Googled I was looking for like, this is where I found PSI for maybe a different therapist in addition to the one I was seeing, because I would accept all the help I could get. And I ended up speaking with a person who claimed to have specialty in the area, but turns out she didn't have lived experience herself. And just like, there wasn't a total level of trust there. So I was still trying all the avenues I knew of, but I hadn't found like the right fit. And then when I went back to my OB, I had been probably 3 or 4 times for like minor things postpartum. I was screened formally once at like 6-week appointment, I guess. But I was in a bad way for all of those appointments, just seeing like everyone from like the front desk to like the nurse practitioner or the medical assistant, whoever I was seeing, shaky and panicky and sometimes crying and like not fine for any of those events. And there was really not a whole lot of like concern or conversation about that. It was all like, okay, you're here. This is your 15-minute time slot. Yeah, this physically, take this. Goodbye. Like, it wasn't a whole thing. So eventually, and this was when I got a little, well, I guess we'll return to that, but remind me of that because I went back and I scheduled an appointment with my actual doctor to share because I had some thoughts. But the last sort of like bad thing that happened to me in trying to seek help was then I also got a psychiatrist in addition to my therapist, not a specialist in this area. And that like telehealth appointment, which sounds dramatic to say, but was one of the worst things I could go through at that specific time. There was clearly 2 monitors and we're not engaged. We're not even looking at me. There's no good morning. There's no, I'm going to help you. Tell me what's going on. It was very much like a medication management, like typing, not even looking at me. And I waited like 8 weeks for this appointment for this person who's going to like take charge of my brain chemistry to like very openly not care. And I was on vacation, I think at the time.
You had one job, dude.
Yeah. And like on some family trip, because we're still trying to do things and get me out of the house, even though I was like having a really bad time. And I remember going to my husband after that and just crying and being like, what do we do? What do we do now? Like, what do we do? Because this was like very harmful to have happened.
Yeah.
Like, I just sat there and was like, who is going to help me? So those were dark times. That was over a period of roughly 6 months without a diagnosis, where it was like so much anxiety daily, most of the time panic attacks, intrusive thoughts about taking my baby out in public, health issues that realistically I did not have but would just spiral about, and like trying to do all the things and not getting the help, which is exhausting. It is an exhausting time. That was very hard. And when I found PSI, that was actually just on the internet. And then I signed up for a support group.
Thank you, Google.
Right. Because I had been focused on like local resources, and that clearly had not panned out. And then it was just a more broad search. And I signed up for a support group. I was like, this is free. We'll try it. And when I tell you that that's when things changed, that is when things changed.
Oh.
Because I remember the first time, like if you've been to one of our support groups, or if not, I will tell you, there's like an education component at the beginning.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is reviewing risk factors for certain perinatal mental health disorders. And I remember like sitting there with my chin on the ground, like, well, that certainly makes a lot of sense.
Check. Well, here we are.
And I was like, okay, well, having felt like I was very dismissed, very invalidated thus far, every step of the way, within the first 15 minutes of this thing, I'm like, we'll try it, right? We're trying all the things. We'll try being like, oh,
these are my people.
Oh. And so that kind of is when things started to shift in a positive way. And I'm very grateful that it did, but just having that information even to start, before we even got to talk to each other, which was its own amazing, powerful healing experience, learning about risk factors for perinatal mental health disorders and the pandemic's effect on people and this and that, and seeing, a virtual room full of women from literally all over the world showing up with the same experience I remember coming out of that experience too and telling my husband, and I was like, okay, like we found an answer to some things.
Yes, we're on to something here.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad that you found a support group. What support group was it? Do you remember? Was it just like a general?
It was the postpartum mood support. And when I tell you, I went to a lot of them. I am not kidding. I actually got out my planner from 2021 the other day, and it's like PSI 11 a.m., PSI 2 p.m. Like, I'm not joking when I was like, there was a time when I was like a 5-day a week, like we're going to pop on whenever this exists. And that was like, because I was alone. I was home by myself.
Yeah.
And so if anyone's out there and worried about going too much, there's no shame, guys. There's no shame.
But you can't.
And I was not the only one that did that. There were a few other people I'd be like, hey, saw you yesterday.
Hey,
how's it going?
What'd you have for lunch yesterday? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you were living through a time where it wasn't like, oh, hey, other person with a baby the same age as mine, let's go for a walk at the park. Come over and sit in my living room. We'll put the baby gates up and let them roll around while we drink coffee. I mean, the regular things that you could have done outside the pandemic were not available. And finally, you found some people who just understood what you were experiencing after even going to professionals and hitting the wall for so many months.
And the trust within like who was facilitating, it was obvious that there was like a specialty here and expertise and like exactly what I'd been looking for and hadn't found, and was like, oh, well, this is where I can ask questions. This is where I can get connected. And that's how that ended up happening. Was I would, talk about these things in support group, and a few of the facilitators of the groups, because I had different ones because I went so often. A few of them actually were like, put your number in the chat. I'm going to call you after this and help you, which was amazing. They weren't even in my state of Florida. They just were like, you shouldn't still be in this place and I'm going to help you. And they did. And I ended up at a facility virtually in Central Florida that specializes in this area, and worked with a psychiatrist who specialized in the perinatal period. And that was where we got diagnoses, we got medication, we paired that with therapy with her and support from PSI. And like, that is like literally how I got better.
So the diagnoses came after attending a support group, after getting connected to local resources with people who specialize in the perinatal
and
period.
not even really local.
Oh,
because that still was not great. But within Florida, where they, at least could see me because I had to like live within the state. And I was like, virtual's fine. Everything is virtual these days.
Right.
It was outrageously expensive, but we were my husband and I were on the same page of like, you need this, and who cares? Like, that is more important than money. And I would still say to him all the time, I'm like, we're lucky. And I had quit my job through this. I stayed in grad school. I was also in grad school during this time and working full time. I ended up leaving my job, but staying in school. But then we're on one income, and love him, but he's a public school teacher. It's not you're not exactly flush with cash, right? So we're spending like, I think it was $185 for 50 minutes, and we don't, and like on one income. But I'd still say to him, like, I have the opportunity to stay at home and not work. And we have one kid. And like, what if I was a single parent? What if I had 3 kids?
Yeah.
What do you do? How do you have time to do this? And how do you afford it? And so like, I was very fortunate in that sense to finally find that. But I'm like, well, even if I found this, like, my point being, it can be overwhelming to think of how far we have to go, but that's why we do what we do, right? Is to try and close those gaps for people. But I would get hung up on that too, of like, I'm very lucky that I can sit here and take care of my baby and go to this expensive therapist. Like, man, but finally that was like a big shift. And the information was so powerful to be like, there are names for these things. This is what you have and this is what we do. And I was like, well, this is what we need. This is what I need in order to process this. So things are a lot less scary when you can name them, So to be like, this is postpartum OCD. These are intrusive thoughts. We're going to not deal with this today.
I can speak for myself, and I've heard this from a number of people, that like, it is so scary when you don't know what to call this thing that you're feeling, and you think, is it me? Like, I don't know. Am I flawed? Am I just like not meant for this? You think it's like something you've done.
Yeah.
It's some personality flaw.
Or not knowing what it is. You also don't know if you're going to get better.
Oh, yeah.
I would stay there mentally for so long and just cry and be like, how am I ever going to feel better when like no one knows what this is or can help me? Like, I was sent to like a cardiologist at one point because one of the symptoms that came with this onset of such bad anxiety was I was chronically lightheaded.
Oh.
And so like my lab work and stuff was fine, but they were like, I mean, I guess go like check your heart out, which is like fine. Like, I appreciated the diligence, right? But I would go to this cardiologist, this young, healthy person, and he's like, you're fine, get out. Like, he was like, I don't know why that, you don't have that. And I was like, okay. And I was just like, well, I'm postpartum and blah, and like have like a meltdown with this cardiologist who's like, well, it's probably that. So, but it's not your heart. You can go. So it's a bit of a wild ride, but yeah.
Oh my gosh. So you started attending all the support groups, literally all of them.
Some weeks, literally all of them, Danny. Literally all of them.
Is this one for me?
You're like,
then I'm there.
He was actually signing into the Zoom first to let people in. I'm kidding.
No, and it didn't stay. It was like when I first discovered it, and that was the only thing that was my only tool at the time that was helpful. And I was like, oh, good. These are all the time. Well, we're going to go. We're just going to go. And then eventually I kind of fell in with one where a lot of the same people kept coming to the same one, and there was some camaraderie, and I'd go to like one a week eventually with like people that usually showed up to the same group, and that was nice. And actually a very beautiful thing has come of that, which is we still have a group chat. We like exchanged information, and I literally talk to these women every single day still. And that was summer of 21, and we talk every day, and it's amazing. And we're all kind of like, some of us are going through the same things now of trying to have baby number 2 post pandemic, in quotes. I know we're not technically done, but in a much better situation with that. And we talk every day, and it is amazing. I haven't met any of these people in person. and yet they are dear friends.
Yeah.
It is amazing. And I'm really, really grateful to have that. And even though I'm not in a place where I'm going to like PSI support groups now, I still have my support group, really.
Yeah.
We talk all the time.
Yeah.
Like we went through that together and a few of us just really connected, and that is an ongoing thing. And it is, I'm so grateful to have that. We have an international contingent.
Okay, I have a follow-up question to this. So like when you're in the support group meeting, how does that part of the conversation happen? Is it like because you're in the Zoom, right? You can like direct message people and be like, hey, listen, like I've seen you here a few times. Do you want to like exchange numbers? Like, are you on, do you have an email? Like, is that how that evolves? Or is there a point where the person says, if anyone wants to like connect outside of this?
Sort of both ended up happening. Early on, I just private messaged someone, like direct message them, because it's actually one of my very dear friends. I was talking to her this morning, where the things she was saying in support group, I was like sitting there, like I could have said them myself. I was alarmed at how someone I'd never met, like our experience was the same.
Yeah.
And a lot of what she was saying, it was like, we were both in a dark spot where she was basically saying like, this is not a sustainable way to exist. Like, this is so miserable. And I was like, I could have said everything you just said today myself. If you want to talk, I know, because groups aren't, 24 hours a day. Like, here's my number if you want to talk to me. Whatever. So there was that. Sometimes I just then, because she did text me and we started talking, I would just put my number in the chat to everyone of like, here's this. Because again, a lot of us were home alone all day with babies that don't talk to us. And it's like, anyone want to be friends?
Yes.
And then eventually we shared with the facilitator that a few of us, like regulars, I guess, had started like an Instagram chat where we keep talking throughout the week in between support groups if anyone was interested. And so like a few times that was like announced, if you will. And then eventually it just sort of ended up being the group that it is, where like a few people came and gone, but then it ended up being like a pretty routine. Like now it's just a smaller group. So it wasn't really official. It was just like, by the way, some of us talk. If you want to do that, you can. So nothing official. But just if you want to connect outside of this, because it's a lot of hours as a new parent where you're by yourself. Yeah. So it was really great.
That's a key component to, getting through something hard, is having some peer support. So I'm so glad you got that. You had your special Instagram group.
Yeah, that was huge.
Cool.
And just, it made all the difference, because my husband would say the same thing. This was definitely like the hardest thing we have gone through as a couple.
Yeah.
And how do you explain to someone what you need when like you don't know how to do that? So even though we shared a house, it was still like so isolating at times, where he was like, I don't know how to figure this out, and how could I expect him to? And I couldn't figure it out. But then I would talk to like my friend, and so much was similar, and it just makes you feel not alone. And that's huge. That helps you heal.
Like, you're like, here, I'm feeling this. And they're like, oh man, I was feeling that yesterday. And you're like, okay, so I'm not that weird.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in that. And in knowing that like some of this, it's people you've never met before, right? But like, if some of this is so universal, and like, that's really helpful to know. And like, also a lot of people in support groups where like, there's like a range of people, it's their first one. And then people who've been going for a while and are a lot better than they were and then they started, which is also really cool. Because then there's people in there who are like watching you have a breakdown, who then hop on and are like, I see you, and this gets better. I have been where you are, and it gets better. And being able to hear that and know that that's true, because someone's like looking through the screen telling you like it does. When no one had been able to tell me that thus far, they're like, I don't really know. It's throwing you for a loop. I was like, well, that's not helpful to me. But to be like, I see that, I've lived that, and I'm much better now, and so will you, was like, I really needed to hear that.
Yeah. When you are in the thick of something so jarring, that question of, when is this going to end? Do I need to make it 2 more weeks, 2 more hours? Like when you were pregnant, and you're like, I don't know if you guys went past your due dates, but I was like, this is never going to happen. I'm going to be pregnant forever. Like, my mom was like, that's actually not true. Actually are going to have this baby. And I'm like, no, I don't think it's going to happen. Or like, when your child is learning to poop on the toilet. And my early childhood education teacher, said, Danny, he's gonna poop on the toilet sometime. And I'm like, no, I don't know. These are much lower stakes than PMADs. But my point is that, like when something is so stressful, so jarring in your life, it's like, if you don't know how much longer you have to go, it is excruciating. And you are so right. So having somebody to go, I know I've been there, and I felt that same thing. And you're doing all the right things, and it's not always going to feel this way. And it's like, okay, that can give you some hope. To keep on going, one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. And eventually my therapist did connect me with a local support group with a specialist. And that was also amazing when things got a little better and we could do things in person. It's just like, when things were so acute, I needed help right then. But then I'd already started going to online groups. So I was like, it's probably really helpful to like meet people too that live here and then connect with someone who specializes in this. And that was also very healing. So really, like, once the ball got rolling, I was like, oh, okay, so help exists. This is less of a mystery. It's not a total mystery. This is very much a thing. These are real diagnoses, with real symptoms, but also real treatments and assistance. Once things started to click into place, which was largely the result of PSI and like how I got connected to different people and practitioners and things, it was like the path to like getting better. It just took me a while to get there. And I know that's not that long in comparison to some people, but 6 months when you are like living fight or flight is a long time.
Yeah. That feels like forever.
Yeah.
Oh, we're so glad that you found PSI. Emily,
I do. So I feel like your story has taken this like very non-linear trajectory, which I think is important, especially because of how common that like circuitous, hello, something's wrong. Hello, anybody. And then you finally get connected to PSI, but it's before you've really cracked the nut of what's happening here. So I feel like we've covered some of the things that, because your story is so non-linear, you got connected to PSI before you had a diagnosis, before you were sort of like on the road to recovery, so to speak. But now you're here and you're recovered and you're fabulous. Is there anything else we need to know about that story before we transition to the molasses round?
You attended support groups, but then didn't you start working at PSI before you became a volunteer, or was it the other way around?
So I started to get some like mojo back, right? As I started getting better.
Yes.
Mojo is the perfect description.
And I remember to go back to this. I'm really proud of myself. I didn't forget this. I went back to my OB and I was like, him personally. I was like, no offense, not your staff, you, because this is your practice. And I basically, I was like calm, cool, collected.
Yeah.
Which was hard, but I was like, instead of crying 3 or 4 times in the office and just being like, I don't know, and like that mess, I was like, you have to hear this. This practice has failed me as a postpartum parent. Mm-hmm. I said, and I found resources, right? It took me a while, but I found them. I'm doing a lot better. The reason I'm telling you this is because if your practice is failing me, I bet it's failing other people. And you're one of the largest, most advanced practices in the area. And you need to hear what I have been through.
Yeah.
So we like weren't there to chat about like physical. I'm like, I just need you to listen. And that was amazing. That was a big day. And he did listen. He could have walked out of the room and been like, okay. But I don't get that impression. He did listen. He was also like, well, we do have connections with therapy and things like this. And I said, well, I will tell you, not one person that answered the phone or from your nursing staff or person I saw here in person in an appointment ever said that to me. And my baby is like 10 months old.
Yeah.
And he's just like, oh. And I'm like, so you may have those connections, but at least in my experience, that was never communicated to me. There wasn't a great amount of concern shown for like my mental, emotional well-being. I said, and you will now learn I have 3 separate diagnoses relating to the process of like having a baby. And that's not okay. I need you to pay attention. I need you to hear people when they come to you and something's not right. And I was like, and there are resources out there. This is very important. You're the first line of defense with most postpartum people, is they come back to you for an exam. You have to do better in this arena. I'm very grateful. I am physically healthy. My baby's physically healthy. Like, it's not like just, I'm going to throw a bunch of insults at you, but like this is very important and you need to listen. So that was a cool day where I was like, right? I was like, okay, we did this. We did pay a copay, but I'm happy to do it. That felt very important to me to do. I look at my life now and I'm like, I just manifested like the hell out of this. I'm sorry if I can't say hell on your podcast, but like, I really did. I'm like, I work here. I volunteer here. This is like the dream. So that was kind of funny. And now I'm working like 30 hours a week. And on our communications team, and it's lovely. It is a wonderful, rewarding job. And I look back and I'm like, I really did that, didn't I? And I know you both were at the conference, because I met you both at the conference.
Yeah, you did.
PSI's annual conference last year. We had a lot of fun. But I would love to hear what you guys think too, because one of the most healing things for me about the conference was seeing hundreds of practitioners show up to learn more about this.
Yeah.
And like with my experience, like I've shared in detail, I felt very dismissed. Mm-hmm. It was very easy for me to look at doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners as the villain. But like, that is not an accurate portrayal of this. And I've since like really come to understand that you're not necessarily taught how to have empathetic, compassionate conversations in medical school.
Right.
Like, you don't specialize automatically in perinatal mental health. Like, it's not, people don't like, my experience was I felt very much like several practitioners did not care. But to see so many people show up and really get a much broader picture of like how many people are getting like their PMHC and how many people are taking this seriously and want to learn more and want to help was so good for me to see, that I was like, okay, I was in my little bubble and this was my specific thing, but this is really much bigger and a lot better than I understood. And I really loved that. So I'd love to hear what you guys thought about seeing that.
I feel the same, I mean, just before the main conference really kicks off, there's 2 days.
Yeah, it's the 2 day. They do the 2 day. Yeah.
Yeah, the components of care training, which you need to take before you take advanced training to earn your PMHC, that happens before the main conference kicks off. So all of those people that are in there are practitioners, specialists in they're going to become specialists, but they work with a perinatal crowd, and they want to know more. They want to serve and support better. And that's empowering, knowing that all of those people are there not to just like get continuing ed credits and like, connect and stuff. They want to do better. And I love that, and it really feels like we're just surrounded by like other people that just are on fire, just like we are about perinatal health advocacy and support and stuff. And being around a lot of people kind of like exhausts me sometimes, except for like at the conference. I only had to go in a timeout one time last year. Emily was like, you need to go have a break because I think it's a little too
people-y.
Excuse me, too people-y for you. Too people-y. So, and I was like, okay, I'll go to my room for 30 minutes. But like, it's just so exciting connecting with people.
Yeah. And just even like in a perfect world, everyone could specialize in everything, right? But that's not where we live, and that's not a feasible thing. Mm-hmm. And I love to see how many people are specializing in perinatal mental health and working with the perinatal population. But also, like, even if you don't do that, PSI has information and resources and help available. So just even building awareness of PSI. So if you're a general practitioner and you're like, this person needs help, just knowing there's this to refer them to. There's no, I was sort of, when I didn't really know much about this, like, why don't you know how to help me? And it's really not that simple, but like PSI exists. So like that whole kind of way of just connecting people to it, even it's not like you're a bad doctor if you don't specialize in this. And I didn't really have a great understanding of that prior. And now I do. And I'm like, that just has really helped me to not have so much anger towards my situation now, to be like, okay, well, I didn't understand a lot of how this works, and now I do.
And while I do think it is super valuable to be a PMHC, not everybody is, getting certified, but at least coming to the conference and like understanding the resources that PSI has is fantastic. If you're a doctor and you don't know the answer to somebody's question, call the psychiatric consult line and ask, because that's free. Pick a peer's brain, like a fellow practitioner who can kind of like, and who is specialized, and can.
If you're listening and you're like, is the conference for me? I can't say yes enough that it is. My master's degree is in higher education. Prior to doing this, I was working as an academic advisor. Like I am not a therapist. I am not a care provider in any way. And I get so much out of the conferences that like when I go to too many sessions, I get too many ideas that I can't do. So I have to be real careful when I'm there, because I'm there as an employee of PSI, right? So like I'm not necessarily there for the sessions. So I have to be real choosy which sessions I'm going to go to, because otherwise I'll come out of them and be like, you know what? New plan. We're going to get a bus and we're going to drive around and provide care all over the place. Like, stay in your lane, Emily. Just stay in your lane. Like, but yeah, if you're not a provider, you can still go to the conference and you can still learn things and you can still make an impact in your community, whether you want to be a PMHC or you just want to like learn some stuff and like have some skills and come hang out with us at the climb table.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a clear trajectory really. I'm in the process of getting my PMHC, but I'm not a practitioner.
Nice.
So I'm kind of like, has it already made me better at my job with PSI? Yes. Has it made me a much better volunteer? Yes. Just in taking the initial trainings, which are very extensive. Yes. Has it made me a better friend and support person to people in my life? Yes. But professionally, I'm like, what do I do with this? I don't know yet, but I'm like, I'm doing this and we will see. I also have a goal I would love to lead my own PSI support group, but as I have mentioned a couple of times, we are trying to conceive our second. And I feel like I have enough self-awareness now to know it is not the time for me to do that, because I want to be grounded and stable and healthy and good for everyone in the group I would potentially lead. So I feel like I'm going to revisit that after, I'm done having my own kids is the plan, but I would love to do that. But on that note, y'all, the post-pandemic baby boom is a little challenging these days. As I don't know if other pandemic parents can relate to that, but like, it's just hard to watch. It's a lot of emotions. You're so happy for everyone that is having babies, but it's also kind of hard to watch them be pregnant and have babies in a way that you couldn't.
Yes.
Like the newborn photo shoots and baby showers and guests at the hospital and grandparents holding their babies without masks. Like my sister just had a baby and it's lovely. And I sit there and I reflect and I'm so grateful that her experience is different than mine in that way. I genuinely am. But at the same time, like, you're also human and jealous that it's in that sense, it's easier, So that's been a bit of a trying time, but I also am I'd much rather this be the situation than still be under lockdown, of course. But anyone else out there who had their baby in the pandemic and then it seems like everyone is having babies, I'm here with you. Hang in there.
Yes, we've heard that from some other folks who had pandemic babies and they were, it's like the feelings are very mixed. It's like, and they can exist at the same time. And you are doing a great job of acknowledging you can be happy for somebody and also be like, dang, like, I really wish that I could have experienced becoming a mom like that. I wish I celebrated my baby like that. I wish I could have. I wish, and they can coexist.
Yeah. So if anyone is feeling down about that, yes, it does not make you a bad person.
Yeah, they can.
All those feelings can happen at the same time. And it's just, it can be hard, but also I still feel like, good out. I'm so happy to see all of these. I mean, it's fun to watch everyone have babies. That's great. But it's also like when you're trying to have your own and your first time around was, in a global pandemic, it can be hard to reconcile it all, but it's okay. We're working through it.
Samantha, would you like to consent to a slow lightning round?
I'm guessing that the lightning round has morphed based on experience so far with this podcast, the way you were saying that.
Every once in a while, my classes that I took to get my degree come in handy. And there was this one that talked about like female identity development and how like we are stronger. And I think that's really true. Like the study was done on women, but I think that's really true of everyone. We are stronger and better versions of ourselves when we don't try to do things alone. And so when we are in community with people who have similar experiences, we can get off topic.
Love that.
And when we are talking about other things that we're passionate about, we can get off topic because, we're connecting. Hello. So
don't mess with the mojo, please. But seriously, I guess we'll get back on topic here. Samantha, can you tell us, please, besides this podcast, what's your favorite podcast?
I think it's a tie between Crime Junkies and My Favorite Murder.
A common thread.
What is up with everybody? Am I the only one who doesn't listen to Crime Junkies? And say the second one again.
My Favorite Murder.
Cool.
Have you guys heard of that
Nice.
podcast? It's so fun. Well, it's a mix of like gruesome murder details, but it's fun because it's led by two female comedians.
That podcast.
They're best friends. It's so great.
Judge someone else, not me. Please, thank you.
No, but I would like rotate between the two of those. I don't know why I'm talking in the past tense. Yeah. I still do that. Yes.
It happened this morning. Right before this podcast.
Oh, totally.
There are a lot of people that are into true crime. Am I under a rock?
I mean, weirdly, I would describe it as like a nice escape, which sounds totally incorrect because I mean, it does. But like, I don't know. It certainly brings you out of like what you're doing. Hopefully you're not experiencing a crime, right? I don't know. It's just kind of fascinating. It's good to get you out of like whatever you're doing, I guess. But I got into both of those, I guess, during the pandemic, and it's just kind of lingered.
Well, I feel it must be entertaining. True crime murder podcast hosted by comedians.
My favorite murder.
Done.
Unsolicited shout out.
If I'm gonna listen to a murder podcast, it had better be fun. I am here for it.
Are you a fan of listening to a book in your ears or holding a book in your hand?
In your hand, always.
Oh, wow.
I do not have the attention span for audiobooks. Somehow podcasts are different.
You're not the only like parent of young kids who has said that. And I'm kind of wondering if this is like because you always have to have one eye, one ear, one, I don't know, spidey sense on what's happening. If like that's something that will evolve for some folks, or if that's just like hard pass, I just need to hold the book. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I just find myself, if it's like, I think if it's a book I'd read before, I could do it. But if it's like a string of new characters, I would constantly be like, who is talking? What has happened? And where are we? So, no.
I just am so, I don't know what, I've gone into this lightning round, not this specific one, just all the lightning round, expecting people to say book in my ear. Duh. I don't know why.
Yeah, I think it depends on the book.
That's cool. What are you reading right
now? I like to constantly have like 2 or 3 books.
I relate to
that
this.
are very like different.
Whoa.
I relate to that too.
Also can't pay attention, I guess. So I'm trying to think of what's on my nightstand. Oh, I just got a book, How to Sit.
Yeah.
By Thich Nhat Hanh, he's Vietnamese monk. My anxious brain has never been very good at like just sitting. So we're going to try to learn that. It looks very short and like easy to read. So I haven't started that yet, but that's on my nightstand. I'm working my way through the first book in the Bridgerton series because that was a big pandemic show.
Oh, same.
My husband and I have probably watched season 1 like 10 times. And I feel like this won't embarrass him to say because I think he'd readily admit that like he likes it just as much as me. He's like, it's a dope show. So we've like watched it 1,000 times. So I'm like, let's dabble with the book. So that I'm like 3/4 of the way through. And the third one that's on there is Goldenrod, which is a poetry collection by Maggie Smith, not the actress, the poet Maggie Smith. And speaking of her her collection called Keep Moving, I read like every 3 days postpartum. So if anyone's a postpartum listener, which I feel like we probably have a handful of, that book of poetry, it is a beautiful collection of like things won't stay like this for long, and like all sorts of like very inspirational, and they're all very short. So like if your brain is overwhelmed, it's like short poems, short little thing. And it was like,
Cool.
she spoke to me. So now I have another collection by her that I got for Christmas. So those are my 3 that are in rotation, because I need to have like different stuff, you know? I'm not always in the mood for a novel or poetry or like a how-to. So we got to have a rotation going.
So Goldenrod's one, and then Keep Moving is a different,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
different collection. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And I love her. My sister recommended Keep Moving. I think she bought it for me and mailed it to my house, actually. And I was like, I needed this. How did you know? So definitely recommend that collection. That meant a lot to me during postpartum days.
This lightning round is becoming expensive for me because we're hearing fantastic recommendations.
Can't stop, won't stop.
It's like, you're going to have to quit podcasting. This isn't working out. What is your favorite go-to for a quick mental break?
Oof. Going outside.
Yes.
Yep. Even for like 2 minutes.
Yes.
Oof.
3 fans right
I never really got overstimulated before having a child, with the exception of when someone was trying to talk to me while I was also on the phone.
Like, why is this happening?
That happens sometimes at work, and I would be like, I can't. But that's like the only real instance I can remember that happening, where now I have a toddler and it's all the time. And so just getting out of like your 4 walls, don't like not supervise your kid, I guess.
Yes.
But just like find the sky, tree, something. Like I am inside dealing with this like household situation. That's usually where I find myself needing a mental break. And I just get out and I'm like, big world. We got wind. Okay, like this is small. This will pass. Nature is good. So even if you just step out your door, I do that several times a day. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I endorse that. I kind of sometimes wonder what my across the street neighbor thought during the pandemic, because I've got 3 kids and I would just randomly just fling the front door open and just kind of go, you know, and because I'm very much with you, Sam, on that. Get outside, change the scenery, get out of the living room, get out of a place where young voices do not bounce off the walls and stab your brain after they've entered your ears. You know? Anyway.
It really is. Yeah, the changing your scenery is big for me.
Yes.
So that's definitely my like one that comes to mind.
Fantastic. What is one way that you might show yourself some radical love today?
Well, my husband and I are going out for our anniversary. We're married 9 years and together for 13. And he'd also agree with me and share that it's not been the easiest having a baby in a pandemic. And
right.
And that's okay to say.
Yes.
It's okay to say. We love each other. We're in it for the long haul, but it's also like not been the most fun. And the fact that like, you know, it's to be celebrated that you keep showing up even when you don't like each other and figure out what your life is now with this new little person that flipped everything on its head. And like, you know, I feel like there's some fear in like being judged and announcing that like your marriage hasn't been like sunshine and daisies, but I'm just gonna, it's what it is. And it's okay because we still are showing up to figure it out, you know? So I feel like celebrating that is pretty big. So I'm looking forward to that.
I have one final lightning round question. How do you take your water? Ice, no ice, flavor, no flavor?
This was inspired by Jigna.
Ice and typically no flavor.
Yes. Yeah.
Sometimes if we're fancy, we do some lemon juice.
Okay.
Yeah. This is your reminder, listeners, to drink your water.
Drink your water, folks.
I feel judged.
I know. Don't just keep refilling your coffee cup all day.
I know.
Sneak in.
I'm hoping when I listen to this episode,
I'm judging myself too, because sometimes I forget.
Thank you. Water.
It's easy to forget, you know?
Yeah.
Write that down.
Good question. Emily, reminds us all to hydrate.
So
thank you for sharing. Thank you for saying all the real things. And
yes,
we loved having you here. And I can't wait to see you. Are you going to the conference?
See y'all there. Me too. But thank you for having me. Seriously, I'm honored to be a part of it. This is a great project that y'all have started of just good, bad, and the ugly and the funny of postpartum and stuff that doesn't get talked about enough.
We're happy to have you. Get out of here.
Genuinely honored to be a part of it.
Thanks for tuning in to the I Am One podcast. Check out today's show notes where we'll drop links to all the important things that we mentioned in this episode. Please consider sharing about our show on social media and following and rating our show wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. It only takes a minute of your time and, well, that'll help with our collective mission of bringing resources and local support to folks worldwide. From everyone here at PSI, thanks again for listening.